Anyways, I wanted to welcome everybody tonight. Thanks for joining us. We have our special guest is Dave McGee, Monochrome owner and winemaker, Monochrome Wines. I do want to say first, I know there's a handful of people here. If everybody followed the Facebook group, we had quite a crowd here at our home for the Dresser on the Road wine tasting. I think it came out, all the comments that we received, everybody loved it. I might do it again. Find somebody else who wants to do it, but I thought it turned out great, and I appreciate everybody that came here. We really loved meeting everybody. I told somebody in they had said the same thing to me, that this is really a social group, social club, if you want to call it that. And then the wine is second. No offense, Dave. But that's what people want to meet, people that have the same passion for the Paso wineries. And that's the common bond. And it's been quite a journey meeting some really nice people. Many of them I call friends now. And so it's been quite a journey. I want to also thank Dave for putting up the wine special so that everybody could get access to some wine for tonight. So with that being said, show us what you're drinking. That's what we start every show off with. Oh, I got the wrong side of the label. Do I? No, there we go.
Yep. That'll do it.
Great.
I haven't decided which one to open.
Well, the clock is a ticking.
We're both and kind of people.
Yeah, they do both. Go with both.
I'm dipping into all of them with my Corvin.
Yeah,
Mike,
right.
Mike opened both.
And that's
kind
kind of what I usually do, Julie.
I can't do all four. Can't do all four.
Anyways, thank you very much and for joining us. And Dave's got an interesting background, and we're going to learn more about it. Now I'm going to turn the show over to. And by the way, this is our 18th. Believe it or not, our 18th Meet Your Makers. Hard to believe. But anyways, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. Jason, take away.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Dave. We're excited about this as it's relatively unique. I think there's only you and Lola Sellers are the only ones I know in all of Paso that are just doing whites. I don't know if there are any others, but we're excited about this one. And clearly the approach is quite different. I'll let you define that approach here in a little bit. It appears to me to be a little bit more scientific versus the other, which is a little bit more, I would call, spiritual. Both great. We're excited to talk to you about your business and your lineup today. Super kind of bold and courageous move, I think, coming into Paso and doing all whites, but it sure fills in, I think, an important need. But I'm going to digress there, and we're going to talk a little bit about your background, Dave, but we're not going to go too deep because I think that would require an entire call on its own with your extensive background. So if you could, for us, just give us a little summary of all the extensive stuff you've done before you got into wine.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Bakersfield. Got a couple of engineering degrees up in the Bay Area, and initially went into aerospace. So I worked doing a lot of radar design, stealth aircraft design, that sort of thing. Did that for a few years down in the LA area. Went back to the Bay Area, got a business degree, got into a bunch of medical fields, working at a bunch of medical technology, medical device companies, ranging from interventional cardiac electrophysiology to interventional neuroradiology, orthopedic, spine, urology, a couple of other things. Doing kind of, whatever needed doing in startups primarily. So I did, marketing, product development, business development, clinical training, mergers and acquisitions, mopping the floor, taking out the trash, that sort of thing, whatever you do in small companies. So I did that for a bunch of startup companies and a bunch of bigger companies. And then did a lot of consulting work for some bigger companies, started making wine in my garage as a hobby up in the Bay Area. And initially that's really what it was. And then I took the online version of UC Davis's winemaking program. And about that time, my wife and I figured we had about enough of the Bay Area rat race and it was time to go somewhere else and do something different. So didn't really know what that was going to be, but I'd grown up in Bakersfield, as I said, so I knew the area. We came down here, we loved it. We figured just move down here and figure the rest out later. So didn't know that I was going to go into wine at that point. It was an idea, but I thought if I was thinking about it, I should probably get my hands dirty, literally, and figure out if it was something I wanted to do. So I did a couple of harvests at a few other local wineries, Via Creek and Alta, Colina, and then started up Monochrome in 2016. And just opened the tasting room in early 2018. So here I am. That's the Reader's Digest version, I guess you could say.
Well done, because I know it's an extensive background. From all that experience you have in all the different industries and the different roles you've been in, are you finding any of that translates to what you're doing now? Are you pulling in, your marketing skills as an example, or your experience to what you're doing in other stuff?
Yeah, in a number of ways. I mean, obviously some marketing background helps in terms of planning what you want to do and how you want to do it. To your comment earlier about, and I've heard this from other people, that I must be brave for doing only white wines in the middle of a red wine area. My response is always that I'm not sure it's any more brave than thinking you're going to be number 351 when there are already 50 others out there making red Rhone blends. So there's that. I think kind of figuring out how I should position the company, what I should do, what type of wines I should make. But I'd say the other thing that comes from a lot of my backgrounds, I worked in a lot of very creative fields where we were always trying to do something new and different and come up with something that nobody else had ever done. And frankly, coming to wine is a bit of a shocker because it's a very non-creative field for the most part, and some people might be surprised to hear me say that. But if you think about red Bordeaux wines, for example, first growth Bordeaux, great wines, they've been doing the same freaking thing since 1855, and you look at most Napa Cabernets, they're kind of doing the same thing. And so wine can be a very tradition bound, kind of stodgy field, I think. And so one of the things I try to do is bring a little bit more creativity and innovation. And if you think about other forms of creativity, music, art, fashion, whatever, that's the norm. People don't just do the same thing everybody else is doing. They try to bring something new to the party, new ideas, and then continue to evolve over their career. So that's a little bit of the perspective that I try to bring to winemaking. And I think that was informed by my previous experiences in a lot of other fields.
Yeah. Well, I would clarify my comment about making the whites in Paso being bold and courageous is less about the fact that it's unique. It's more about the fact that there's not the same amount of templates for how to make white wines, especially the creative, unique type of blends that you're making. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's a little less forgiving. You can't hide as many sins in making a white wine as you can in a red. So that's where I feel like it's a little bit more bold than just being unique to make wines, if that makes sense, or make white wines, if that makes sense.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because part of the idea behind the name monochrome is a reference to photography, and I enjoy photography. And in photography, some people think that black and white or monochrome photography is not as interesting or as complex as color, and yet most fine art photography is done in black and white. And I think most people will tell you that it's harder to make a black and white photo work because you can't just rely on a pop of color to hold somebody's attention. You've got to get the basics right, to your point, the subject matter, composition, tonality, and so forth. And it's the same thing with wine. I think what you were hinting at is with red wines, you can cover up a lot. You can throw a lot of oak and tannin and extraction and cover up for a lot of things. White wines, you really don't have that luxury. You've kind of got to get the basics right where they just come out kind of flat and boring. And that's what I try to do by the way I make wines, is make a lot of different things that I can use to build in more complexity into the wine so that it's more than what people expect from a typical white wine.
Yeah, for sure. And if I'm going to make a GSM in Paso, there's 200 other mentors I could go talk to about how to make it. If I'm making a Greeno Gris or I'm sorry, a Grenache Gris or what any of the blends that you're making, I don't know. Is there anybody else in Paso that you can go talk to about how you make those wines? They're pretty unique.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a bit of a high wire act. I kind of make it up as I go along, basically. But because I'm not boxed into making a specific type of wine, I can end up tweaking it until it turns out something I like.
Yeah. Well, let me rewind quickly. I don't want to go too far into the personal stuff, but I am curious. Most winemakers have very little time off, but the occasional time that you have a favorite pastime hobby outside of making wine?
I like to travel a lot. I used to do that a lot in some of my previous jobs. Haven't been able to do it as much recently. Part of that is we have a lot of animals around our house, and so arranging for both my wife and I to go away at the same time is challenging because finding someone to take care of the animals is a bit of a challenge. But certainly I enjoy that when I have a chance to do that. I think otherwise I just enjoy, a lot of things and learning new things and challenging myself a bit.
So, on the travel topic, what's your favorite place that you've been, and what's the next place that you really want to go?
I mean, I really like, I really enjoy Italy, I've traveled around in Italy a bit, not as much as I would have liked, but I really love that. And I used to be able to go down to the French Riviera around Nice quite a bit for work. And, just beautiful area, great scenery, great food. Hard not to enjoy that, As to where I'd like to go some places I haven't been before. I'd love to go to South Africa at some point. I would have said Russia up until the last couple of years. Not intent to go there at the moment, but I think just someplace I haven't been before would be good. But South Africa I find very interesting, and certainly from a wine perspective, they're making some really interesting wines down there these days.
Some good whites in South Africa too, right?
Absolutely.
What's your favorite non-wine adult beverage?
I don't know. I mean, there's a saying that, making wine consists of 40% cleaning stuff, 40% moving around heavy objects, and 20% drinking beer. And there's a certain truth to that. So I do enjoy good beer. I don't drink as much hard liquor as I probably used to, but certainly I enjoy some good beers when I have the opportunity to drink those.
That is the number one answer. Like Family Feud here. And do you have a favorite beer?
I've always been a fan of Negro Modelo, actually.
Which I believe is
Yeah.
the new number one beer in the U.S.
I don't think the Negro version, just General Modelo is. Yeah.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. We hear often it takes a lot of beer to make great wine.
Yep.
Do you recall the first wine that really made an impression on you?
I remember the first white wine that really made an impression on me, and I think it was a Smith Lafitte Blanc, so Cabernet Sauvignon Bordeaux blend, and I think that was one of the first times that I got a sense that white wines could really be something special and have sort of complexity and layers and just a much more involved experience than your typical thing that you're accustomed to getting at the grocery store. And so I think that was probably influential in my later decisions to go into white wine.
Got it. So you mentioned your time at Via Creek and Alta Colina. And I think I read that you spent some time working at Nicora. Did I see that correctly?
I did that for a while too, yes. Yeah, I was actually co-owner of Nicora for a while, and I worked with Nick and company.
Oh, okay. I like Nick's stuff. Do you have any mentors? I'm curious about this one, just again, because of what we were just talking about a minute ago, of how unique the wines you're making. A lot of the people we talk to have mentors that they had worked with previously that are helping them out still. do you have mentors that are helping you with the business today? Maybe in general versus the specific blends, or both?
No, I can't really say that I have a mentor in the winemaking world. I worked with Riley Hubbard a bit in the early days, and she's a great gal and she makes some really great wines. Her role was really to help me doing anything outrageously stupid. But in terms of really inspiration and mentorship, I can't point to any other winemakers. Actually, I'm kind of doing my own thing. I'm much more inspired by creative people from other fields, like Brian Wilson, for example, from the Beach Boys, or David Bowie, or something like that. Because the level of creativity, and I think in the case of David Bowie, the willingness to keep changing and do something different. And just because you've had success doing one thing, that's no reason to stick and just do that over and over again. So challenging yourself to try something new and have a different approach to things is something I always try to keep in mind. And so I'm kind of busy trying to figure out what I want to do in the 2023 vintage. But I don't know what it was going to be, but it won't be what I've done before. So see.
2023 started off plenty of moisture. How's it looking today?
I'm pretty optimistic about it because I think getting all the rain up front was good because we needed it. Obviously the drought was a big problem. And I think even though most of the vineyards are irrigated, you start to worry about the ground level of water and that sort of thing. So I think that's off to a good start. I think that will help with the yields, which were horrendous last year. So far, it's been a very, very cool summer here, which I think will be interesting if that continues. It wouldn't surprise me if suddenly, 2 weeks from now, it's 115.
Right.
But I think what we all hope in the winemaking field is it doesn't end up being a repeat of last vintage, where you had this huge heat spike in mid-August to early September, where it was suddenly 105, 110 degrees, but more importantly, it didn't cool down at night, which is rare for Paso. And that really caused everything to ripen a lot faster than it normally would. Normally I have most of my white fruit in before, the big wave of red fruit starts coming in. But last year you had a lot of people bringing in red fruit in the middle of August, which was kind of unheard of. So I think we're all hoping we don't get a repeat of that. If it continues to stay cool, I think that could be very interesting, because I think it might give kind of a different profile to a lot of the wines being made here, but we'll see.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Yeah. What is the difference between now many of the red winemakers we talk to, they have whites in their lineup, but what are the distinctions between the harvest you would go through and what they're doing? Is it time of year? I'm just curious.
Well, most of the red producers here harvest their fruit a little bit later than I typically would for whites. And part of that is just it takes a little bit longer for sort of the characteristics of reds to develop, but also the sugar level and therefore the alcohol level will be a bit higher. So, you get a lot of the Paso reds that are 14.5, 15.5, 16.5% alcohol. And that's primarily driven by the ripeness of the fruit when you harvest it. So you get a lot of those in a normal year being harvested anywhere from, mid to late September to late October, even occasionally early November. Normally, my fruit comes in a little bit early. I tend to pick it a little bit early because I don't like to get it too ripe and the booze content too high. So normally I'm harvesting fruit somewhere between early September and maybe early October, something along those lines. So a little bit earlier than most reds.
Dave, you referenced the name monochrome earlier and the correlation to photography. Is there any more of the story behind the name that you can share?
Well, the other part of it obviously is that monochrome technically means one color. And since I only make white wines, that seemed like a good name for it. So really those two ideas are what was behind the name. And I was fortunate enough that nobody else had ever taken it before. So I was able to get a registered trademark on it and haven't heard from anyone else's lawyers. So that,
It is a good name, and I really like your labels. I think they're cool labels. Your first vintage was 2016, correct?
yes.
What was the lineup like in 2016?
So I made 5 wines. I made a little bit less than, I don't know, 475 cases, something like that. So the 5 wines were barrel distortion, which was in that year it was 100% Albarino. So it was a blend of it had some barrel fermented in neutral French oak, some barrel fermented in stainless, and a little bit of skin fermented Albarino. That was one of them. One of them was variations on a theme, which is a little bit of a take on a white Bordeaux blend. It was primarily Sauvignon Blanc, and it had some Marsanne in it. It had a touch of skin fermented Sauvignon Blanc that was thrown in there. There was one called Analog in a Digital Age, which was Marsanne that had been done in the amphora, and some Chardonnay that had been done in barrels. The 4th one was Blasphemy, which that year it was actually 100% Chardonnay. It was one of the few times I've ever made 100% anything. But again, it was made in a bunch of different ways, all done completely differently. And what was the 5th one? I don't know, I forget. I'd have to check the notes, but yeah, those were the main ones. So some of those have been reproduced in other vintages going forward. Wall of Sound was the 5th one, which was a blend of that year. It was a little bit more Viognier than Roussanne, but it was a Viognier and Roussanne blend.
How do you select each year the blends you're going to make?
I really don't go into it with a predefined notion of what they're going to be. It's really what works out during the blending session. And my winemaking style is really about making a lot of different versions of each variety. So I might make 4 to 6 versions of Albarino, 4 to 6 versions of Chardonnay, and so forth for all the varieties that I work with. Some of them would be made in a more rich style, like maybe a little bit more new or less used oak. Some of them might be neutral oak. Some of them might be in the amphora. Some of them might be skin fermented. And so I make a lot of components and pieces, and I think about it more as making components than actually making wines. And then once I have the components, I piece together the wines. And as I always say, it's very analogous to cooking. You know, if you're cooking and you only had 1 or 2 ingredients, you're going to be pretty limited. But if you've got a whole pantry of different flavors and spices and colors and textures, you can come up with something a little bit more interesting and have more fun doing it. So that's what I do. And the blending usually goes to about 4 or 5 different passes, and usually takes about that long to sort everything out and get it all to fall into place.
So I'm fascinated by this, where you're pulling fruit from all over California. Some of the best.
California. Yeah, I know my guardrail is, you know, as long as I can get it on a truck and get it here within about 3 hours of the time it was picked. In theory, that opens almost to the Santa Cruz Mountains to the north and then down to Santa Barbara. So it is a pretty big swath of the Central Coast. And the great thing about that is there's so many microclimates here. You know, I don't know any place else in the world, whereas, as I said, with one of the wines, within a 100-mile radius, you can get great Gewürztraminer, and you can also get great Albarino. You could never get that in Europe. You know, it's kind of a unique part of the world that you can do that. And because I don't own any vineyards, it gives me the opportunity to take advantage of it.
But your commitment to the fruit is prior to it being grown, correct?
Correct. Yeah, you usually get a contract, and I typically do it year by year, but usually have a contract in place probably 6 to 8 months before harvest.
So you're selecting then vineyards that you're confident is going to produce some good fruit, and then you're bringing it in, and then you're deciding from there, after tasting them and going through your blending lab, what you're going to make. Is that kind of how it's working out?
It's you know, obviously finding the vineyards that are right for each specific variety. So before I started Monochrome, for 2 growing seasons, I plotted the daily high and daily low temperatures at about 20 different wine growing areas around the world, primarily France and Spain, and then up and down the California coast. And what that allows you to do is, let's say you're looking for Chardonnay. Well, the homeland for Chardonnay is the Burgundy region of France. And well, how does that map to various points up and down the California coast? That'll get you in the ballpark. And you could do the same thing with Sauvignon Blanc or Albarino or Viognier or what have you. That'll get you in the ballpark. And then beyond that, you're really looking for vineyards that have a reputation for good farming practices and have had their fruit used in good wines previously, and then hope you can talk them into selling you some of it. But
What region are you pinpointing as the best correlation for Chardonnay?
no great surprise. I mean, I think the Santa Rita Hills area is very good. Bien Nacido, which is Santa Maria Valley, they're both cooler climate areas. You never get it exact to France because France is so much higher latitude than we are here. If you ever really look at the maps, the southernmost tip of Spain is about where San Jose is. So we're quite a bit further south. And so that kind of screws with the duration of the seasons. But beyond that, you get as close as you can.
So what's the most challenging part of all of it, of making the wine, the whole business?
I don't know. They all have, I would say probably, the selling it and supporting the sale and dealing with all of the bureaucratic stuff that you've got to do. For example, if you're going to sell wine outside the state and you're going to ship it, you've got to get permits on each state on a state-by-state basis. That was kind of a prohibition of a residual of the prohibition repeal, that they gave the states the right to regulate alcohol sales in their state as they saw fit. So they all did it differently. And it would be nice to think you could just get one permit and ship anywhere in the country, but that isn't the case and probably never will be. So that part is a big nuisance. But it's like running any other small business. There are some things that are really great. There are some things that are pretty tedious. So it just goes.
Do you know, outside of California, what state consumes the most white wine?
I don't actually. I mean, you would guess that probably some of the bigger states and some of the warmer climate states, Texas, Florida, things like that. I mean, New York, just based on size, maybe. I don't know. I haven't actually seen that figure.
Are you distributing out of California yet?
Not distributing, no. I mean, I do ship to about, I think 14 or 15 states now.
Oh, nice.
So all the wine is sold either directly through the tasting room, through our wine club, and people can order online and I can ship to states, and then a handful of restaurants here locally. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah. What's the most exciting part of making wine?
I don't know. I always think the actual early stages of, getting the fruit in and processing it and making the wine is always the most exciting part, because it's sort of like, your first day in new school, where you got all these plans and ideas and you're very excited to try them all out. Now, sometimes like the last vintage where yields were about half what I thought they would be, you have these grandiose plans and then you get half the fruit you thought you were going to be, and then you have to throw those out the window and call an audible. But I always enjoy that part. I do enjoy working in the tasting room and interacting with customers. And for those of you who have been here, we do it by appointment, but it's really set up more to allow this sort of interaction. I had been doing them all myself up until fairly recently. I've got another guy named Elliot that does most of the days now, but we try to set it up so it really gives people the opportunity to kind of relax and, vibe more about like sitting around a dinner table with friends, drinking wine and asking questions about wine and winemaking and food pairing and, kind of whatever pops in their head, rather than just standing at a bar. That's the experience for people.
So this next question has become a fan favorite.
Yeah.
And what we're looking for.
Tasting fees?
I'm sorry?
You ask about tasting fees?
No.
No.
No, but that's
Don't
a
bring
whole
that
other
up.
story.
Don't bring that one up.
This one's a genuine favorite, and it's pro tip, or pro tips. And what we're looking for is any pro tips you have on consuming wine that might make the experience better. And whatever pro tips you have to share, one that I would request that you put in the list is maybe some advice on best temperature to consume white wine, because I think that might be misunderstood.
Yeah, so I'll tackle that one first, because I get that question a lot here. And, there's a saying that particularly people in America tend to serve their white wines too cold and their red wines too warm.
Yeah.
I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. Like, if you're sitting out by the pool, it's 105, then do what you need to do. But if you're going to get the most out of a wine, it's important to serve it properly, and part of that includes the proper temperature. And it's important to understand that a lot of your sense of taste is linked up to your sense of smell. So if you think about, for example, when you have a head cold, you can't taste anything. Well, that's the reason for it. And so that's why it's important not to serve a wine too cold, particularly white wine. I recommend that for white wines, you serve them usually somewhere between about 50 and 58 degrees, maybe a little bit toward the cooler end if it's talking about kind of a lighter, more crisp wine, toward the upper end if you're talking about more of a rich, full-bodied wine. And some people that come into the tasting might try to serve at approximately that range, and they're a little surprised that the wines aren't colder, but then they really recognize the different flavor profiles that you get. So that's what I would recommend for people, and that's really the reason behind it. It is, if you're really going to try to get the most out of the wine that the wine has to offer and be able to appreciate it, getting that temperature is very important. And obviously having good stemware and blah, blah, blah is also important.
Give me that range again. I heard something to 58, but I missed the first part.
I would say about 50 to 58 degrees
50,
Fahrenheit.
58. Okay.
So, definitely a lot warmer than what your refrigerator temperature is, and a bit cooler than your typical room temperature is. So, you could either, take it out of your wine refrigerator. Most wine refrigerators, they tell you to aim up for about 55 degrees. That's not a bad place to start, is just take it right out of your wine refrigerator. Again, if it's a lighter, more crisp wine, you might want to throw it into the regular refrigerator for 10 minutes or so. If it's more of a rich, full-bodied wine, let it sit out for 10 minutes.
Perfect. Any other pro tips?
I would say get a good glass, a nice wine glass definitely helps the experience. Not only are they designed to kind of help channel the aromatics to your nose and your mouth where you can appreciate them, but it's just a more pleasant experience, and it's very different drinking a fine wine out of a really nice glass versus a red Solo cup, for example. Either will do the job, but it's a different experience.
Do you have a preferred stemware brand?
There are a lot of good ones. I just changed over the brand that I'm using in the tasting room. It's an Austrian brand called Gabriel Glass.
That's my go-to white.
That's what it looks like. It's just, and there are actually two versions of this. So this is the hand-blown one that's very, very delicate and quite expensive, but gorgeous piece of glass. And then I have another one that's, so this one, which is basically the exact same shape. It's just, this is machine made. It's a little bit thicker glass. It's a little bit thicker stem. It's more sturdy. You don't have to worry about breaking it so much. So I use these when I'm pouring outdoors on the patio, or when, like, for example, I've got little sections here where people tend to sit if they have kids or long-tailed dogs who tend to break things. So that glass is a little bit more rugged, and it's not quite as big a deal if they break one. So, but there are a lot of other good wine, good brands out there. Riedel is always hard to go wrong with good Riedel glasses. Spiegelau makes some nice, well-priced glasses. And then you can go all the way up to the really fancy stuff like Zaltos and things like that, which are gorgeous, but very delicate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I think the other, advice that I would give people is just stretch your experiences, try something you haven't had before. Don't just drink the same wine you've always had or that you always like. Occasionally challenge yourself to try something that you might not normally think you'd like, or try a different food pairing. Sometimes there are people that, okay, if I'm going to have a steak, I got to have a big, bold red wine. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe try a crisp acidic wine. There's a school of thought that sometimes having the acidity that cuts through the fatty content of a rich steak gives you a different experience. So I would say just try things like that and experiment a bit.
I like that. I have not tried that yet, and I'm going to.
But there's
That's a
another
good one.
there's another rule of thumb in pairing, which basically is what you like goes with what you like. And I find that works more often than not. If you like the wine and you like the food, you'll probably like the two of them together. So just don't overthink it.
Very much my wife's motto. She doesn't care about pairing. She just wants what she likes, and it works for her. So you're probably right on there. And I'm glad you showed the Gabriel Glass because that's my go-to white stemware.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about your current lineup.
Okay.
Can you fill us in on what you currently have available?
So I just bottled the 2022s. Those won't be released for another couple of months. So right now in the tasting room, I'm pouring kind of a cross section of a couple of different vintages, but the 2021s, which is the latest one that's totally out there. So there were 6 wines. Again, I tried to make them all different. They're all kind of unique creative blends. So barrel distortion is always primarily Albarino. It has a little bit of skin fermented Albarino. The last couple of vintages, I've thrown a little bit of Gewürztraminer in there, which it's interesting in small quantities. It doesn't really register as Gewürztraminer. It just sort of pops the fruity aromatics a bit. Then there's a wine that's the inverse of that, which is called North by Southwest. So that's primarily Gewürztraminer. It has a little bit of skin fermented Gewürztraminer, and then it has about, I think, 9% Albarino in it. And the Albarino just blends really well with the Gewürztraminer. It kind of just doesn't fight it. It just sort of rounds it out and gives it a little bit more of a fruity characteristic, which I like. There's a wine called let's see, Sense of Out of Place, which is a blend of Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. So it's kind of a strange combination of the two of those. And it's got a little bit of skin fermented Sauvignon Blanc in it. So that's kind of an interesting wine. It tastes like it has more Sauvignon Blanc in it than it actually does. It has more Chardonnay than Sauvignon Blanc, but it doesn't at all taste like, your typical Rombauer or typical California Chardonnay. It's much more sort of crisp and light. Altered Images is a blend of Chenin Blanc and Chardonnay. The Chenin was from Jurassic Park Vineyard. It was done primarily in oak barrels. Some of them were a little bit, they're all used, but some of them were a little bit more new. Some of them were a little bit more used. And then the Chardonnay was from Viennacito, and there's only 21% of that. That was done in the amphora. Then there is, let's see what else. Smile, which is Viognier with a little bit of Chenin Blanc. And then Centertone, which some of you are drinking tonight. That is actually 100%. Pardon?
Sorry, Dave, say that again. We had some interference there somewhere.
Okay.
My bad.
So Centertone is actually 100% Grenache Gris, which it's rare that I do 100% anything, but it's actually made up of about 7 different components that were all done differently. The idea behind most of the 2021 vintage, including particularly this one, is if you think about the qualitative characteristics of wine, flavors, aromatics, mouthfeel, texture, acidity, color, oaky characteristics, tannin, phenolics, and made individual components of Grenache Gris, each of which were done completely differently, trying to isolate and bring out those specific qualities isolated by themselves. So I decoupled them all, and then I used those 6 or 7 components to kind of construct the wine from that. And so it's a pretty interesting wine. you kind of have to think about what you're tasting, but it leads with a lot of flavors and textures. You get a touch of oak characteristic. The color has a little bit of sort of a bronzish tone to it from the Grenache Gris. And then it has a bit of tannin at the back end, which is really kind of cool. It's a little bit more red wine characteristic. But I'll show you a photograph. I think if I can show this on the screen on my phone, we'll see. But this is, so I don't know, can you guys see this? So that's basically a photograph of a bunch of the individual components that I made in the 20.
I think your picture swapped.
Swapped. Okay, I'll pull it up again. There. Okay.
Yeah. Well
So
done,
the
Anne.
individual components, those are all basically white wine fermentations, but you can see how different the colors all came out. And that's really indicative of the different characteristics in the wine. So I really stretched those things as much as I could and then pieced those all back together. So center tone was sort of like, as I say, it's probably one of the more complicated white wines ever made, but I think it came out pretty good.
Came out really good. Cheers.
So that was it for the 2021 vintage. And 2022, I got a couple new varieties.
Got
I
it.
got some Vermentino that I played with. I got another Spanish variety called Albio Mayor. I'm hoping to get some Godeo, which is another Spanish variety this coming vintage. So yeah, should be fun.
And, you know, I couldn't help but notice on your lineup on your website that it appears that you have quite a bit of barrel time on your wines. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it's more than most white wine producers. And some of it depends a little bit on the style of wine you're making. I mean, Ryan Pease, you guys know him from Paso Robles. He makes some great white wines, but very different style than what I do. And so his are primarily done in stainless. And so they're ready a lot earlier. So he tends to bottle his, I think, in like January or February. Whereas the way I make the wines, it usually takes a bit longer to come around. And so they're typically in barrels, usually 9 or 10 months before I bottle them. And then, so bottling is typically somewhere between, late June and early August. And then I usually keep them in bottles for a few more months before I release them to the wine club. That's typically September, October for the first batch, and then another 6 months after that. So they do get a bit more age on them than a lot of white wines that you get. Not quite as much as some of the reds, but for whites, they're a little bit more than usual.
Yeah, we're typically we see all the red wines in the fall releases. So for you to release the white is unique, where everybody the other winemakers that are primarily red will release their white in January, February, March, something like that. So
Well, I think that also says something about their business model. Most of those don't produce a lot of whites, and so they try to target it for the summer months. Whereas, I do nothing but whites, and so I have them year round, and I encourage people to drink them year round, which we do all the time. So I just try to release them when I think they're ready to go.
Did we lose Jason? There he is.
You
Sorry.
did. I dropped. I apologize. It took forever for it to reconnect. Sorry about that.
Say you're in.
So I'm not sure what I missed, but if we haven't talked about it, Dave, you're doing something really unique with Immersi. So I want to talk about your club and this kind of special thing you're doing with Immersi now, and then I hope for your sake that it happens again in like November, December.
Yeah, so I mean, a little bit about our club. We do have a wine club. We have 2 levels. One is 8 bottles a year, the other 16, and both of those are split between 2 releases. We do a fall and a spring release, and each release is usually half the new vintage. There's a default release, which I choose, but I do give everyone the opportunity to customize it if they want to. So I send out an email a couple weeks prior to each release and say, here are the new wines that are coming, descriptions of those, but here's some other wines that are still available. So if you did want more of this, less of that, substitute this for that, add these, let me know. And I can do that. If I don't hear from you, you get the default set of wines. And it's interesting that pretty much everybody loves the idea of being able to customize their shipment. In reality, I would say less than 10% of the people actually do. Most people who are in Monochrome Club, I think, are along for the ride. They know I'm going to come up with something different each year and something unique, and they want to be able to have at least a bottle or two of each of those. And then if there's something that they particularly love, they can order more. So as I said, most people just go with the standard shipment. A few people customize and quite a few actually add, but at least I do give them that opportunity. So that's the basics on the Monochrome Wine Club. As for Emercy, I've known Orion for a number of years. He's the winemaker over at Emercy. He used to be at Electa. Prior to that, he worked at Law and Booker, I think. And then Elliot, who runs my tasting room most of the time, he used to work over at Emercy. So we have some connections there. But we just felt it was a kind of an interesting opportunity. What we're doing, for those of you who might not have heard, is we're doing kind of a club crossover, as we refer to it. So for the months of July and August, Monochrome is extending club benefits to Emercy club members, and Emercy is extending club benefits to Monochrome club members. So that means complimentary tastings for a certain number of people and discounts on wine and that sort of thing. So we just started it a couple of days ago. There's been a lot of enthusiasm about it. So we'll see. I think it's something that is good for everybody. It gives the club members an opportunity to experience another wine brand. I think they make great wines. So it's primarily, Paso big red wines. They make one white, I think, but you don't really go to Emercy for the whites, you go for the reds. And I think it's also nice because there really isn't any sort of conflict between, not too many people go to Emercy for their whites, and if you're coming to Monochrome for reds, you're severely confused. So I think it works out pretty well.
And
Well, Dave-
you're only a few 100 yards apart.
Yeah, probably about, I don't know, quarter mile, something like that. They're in what's called the Tin City Annex, which is sort of a later development. It's not too far away, maybe a quarter
Right.
mile.
Well, every wine of yours I've had, I've really enjoyed. And I was one of those people for the longest time that was just reds. But back to your pro tips, just trying some others. I found it a mistake to ever think that I was just reds. I've liked everything I've had of yours. I love the crossover thing that you're doing. And I hope again you guys do that November, December for your sake.
Well, it's sort of the first effort, and we'll see if it's successful. We'll probably extend it, or maybe we'll do it with a different winery or something like that. But
Yeah.
So far, so good.
Well, we've got some questions. If I can run through these questions real quick from the chat. First question is, how many glasses do you break each week on average?
Not many. I would say we probably break one glass every 3 or 4 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, that's about the same as at my house.
Probably less than what you would think. All these glasses are actually approved to go through the stemware washer, so that makes it nicer. But you get accustomed to handling the glasses, so you don't do anything dumb and break a lot of them. So it isn't as many as you would think.
That question was from Laura. Let me scroll back up. From Karen and Dennis, any particular Spanish Albarino that you like?
Yeah, there are. So if you're talking about true Spanish, there's a brand called Lacana, which it's a great, well-priced Albarino. You can probably get it. I bought some for a friend of my wife's. I think you can get it online for probably $17 a bottle or something like that. But it's a really nice, easy drinking, well-made Albarino. It doesn't necessarily have some of the complexity of some of the more high posh versions, but if you're just looking for a very nice, easy drinking, well-made Albarino, it's hard to beat Lacana, actually, and that's from Spain.
Good tip. I would put Cava in that bucket. If you like sparkling wine, you can get some good price ones from Spain too. Tell us about, from Laura and Joe, tell us about Jurassic Park Vineyard.
Yeah, so that's down, it's not too far from Los Olivos. And it's considered an old vines vineyard. I think most of it was planted back in the 1960s or 1970s, which for California white vineyards is pretty old. It's a bit of a survivor vineyard for Chenin Blanc. Chenin Blanc has gone through a lot of different phases. It was originally very well regarded, and then at some point it became associated with a lot of the inexpensive jug wines they make in the Central Valley. And I think its reputation took a bit of a hit in the process. So it kind of fell out of favor for a long time, and they were ripping up a lot of Chenin Blanc vineyards in California. So this is kind of one of the survivors, but it's kind of an iconic vineyard. As for the name, I don't know where the name came from. I had heard that they found some fossils down there. I don't know whether they named it before or after the books and movies came out. If after, I'm kind of surprised they haven't been sued by somebody, but
Right.
my vineyard, not my problem. I just get fruit there.
Got it. Good insight. Laura Calvert also asked, what do you like to eat with Centertone? And I assume that is the current vintage of Centertone.
Yeah, there have only been two. So there was a 2020, which was Grenache Gris, and it had a little bit of Pickpool in it that I got with Ryan Pease. And then the 2021 is 100% Grenache Gris. I think that's, I always joke, my wife and I have the difficult responsibility of drinking some of the leftovers at the end of the weekend from the tasting room. And we tend to drink them with just about everything. I think these wines are pretty versatile in that none of them are really tart, acidic white wines, and none of them are the big buttery, oaky California Chardonnays. Centertone's a little bit more on the kind of the bigger, rich, more complex area. So I think, I think it's good with kind of like light seafood and maybe scallops or something like that. But I think something that gives you some time to actually think about the wine rather than just, treat it as a porch pounder. I think that wine really lends itself to kind of contemplative drinking, if you will. So I don't know. I can't be too much more specific than that, but.
And ironically, I looked this very question up before because it's what I'm drinking. And AI told me that some buttery escargot is the way to go. So, Lori, give that a shot.
Okay. All right. That probably would be the French influence. There isn't a lot of Grenache Gris grown in California or the United States. In fact, I just put in a submission to the ABC alcohol beverage to allow Grenache Gris to be used on a wine label in the United States, because right now it's not, strictly speaking, an approved variety for inclusion on labels because it's so rare. But it's made in France quite a bit more broadly.
And Tablas Creek hasn't already started that effort, huh?
No, Tablas doesn't have any Grenache Gris to my knowledge. The only two vineyards around the area that I'm aware of that have Grenache Gris right now is Onyx was the first, and that's where I get mine. Their previous winemaker had planted it, and then they didn't know what to do with it, and so they offered some of it to me, hoping I'd help them figure it out. So they have some, and then Guillaume planted some in Clos Helen's vineyard.
Got it. Karen and Dennis, you might need to clarify this question for me. Have we gotten an email about that? What was that in reference to, if you don't mind?
It was about the club offering combo with Emercy. I don't remember seeing anything about that.
Got it.
Well, I don't know. I sent out two emails. One was to our club members, and one was the general mailing list that we had. So if you should be on either one of those and you didn't get them, then email me on the side, because there's probably an issue. Either that, or it's going in somehow in your spam box or something like that. But if it's not,
I'll email.
Yeah, email me and I'll see if we can straighten out your email address or something like that, because it might be mistaken.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
I did
Thank
see
you.
the email. Matter of fact, I got it from both you and from Orion. So
Yeah, that's right. I got both too.
Yeah.
I don't think I got one from Orion.
Oh, I did. I'll forward it to you, Dimitro.
No, I know I've seen it elsewhere, but I don't think I got one from Orion, and I'm a club member.
There's a good question there. Is are white wines ever decanted?
Yeah,
I suppose you could. I don't think it's nearly as common as for reds, you know. I mean, definitely it's good to let them get a little air. And I think sometimes it's very interesting to, particularly for a complicated wine, to open it up and then just sort of slowly have a glass or two as it gets some air and warms up a little bit. Sometimes you can have dramatically different experiences there. But back to the decanting thing, usually it's not as necessary for whites as it is for reds. With reds, frequently it's because it's a young red and it needs some oxygen to really open up and then sort of soften up a bit. So, I mean, I suppose you could decant it, but I usually don't recommend. Oddly enough, I think, you know, people think that red wines age a lot better than whites, and sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. But from my experience, once you open a bottle up, I think whites last longer than reds. You know, so if you're not going to drink it the same night, you know, if you're going to put it back in the refrigerator for a day or two, whites seem to hold up better. There are a lot of reds that I've had that they're great for about, you know, a couple hours after they're open, and then they kind of take a nose.
Fell off quickly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's, hey, Jason, let's ask Susan's question, and then I promised Mike Kelly he could ask his questions, and he's got.
Okay. Okay. So Susan's question is, what is your proudest moment as a winemaker? Great question, Susan.
Well, I mean, I guess probably the first vintage you get in bottle is always kind of a big moment, you know, particularly when you haven't done it before. So that was kind of a big moment, you know. And another one that's kind of a funny story, though, was when the latest rounds of scores came out from Robert Parker. It was funny because I got some really good scores. My first response was, "Oh, great, I got some good scores." My second thought, which came about 2 seconds later, was, "Oh shit, now people are going to expect me to make those same wines over and over again." But then quickly followed with, "Well, that ain't going to happen." So that was kind of an interesting, funny moment that I went through. But, you know, I'd say in terms of the proudest moment, it's probably like, you know, the first time you make your first vintage and you pour it for someone and they like it. That's always kind of reassuring.
Well, very humbly stated, David, and I'll say it. You've got some of the highest scoring white wines that we've seen, certainly in the region. But what you've done, I mean, the scores that you've achieved is pretty spectacular. I mean, you've got to be proud about that. I appreciate and respect the humility, but you've really kind of set a benchmark.
Let me say one thing about that, though, is, I mean, it's not that I mean, I'm happy for myself, but I'm happy generally to see white wines getting more recognition, you know. And I think when I first started this, there weren't that many people in Paso that were trying to make seriously good white wines. There were a handful, and they tended to be French, because the French historically, you know, appreciated fine white wines. But I think that there are a lot more interest in the winemaking community of trying to make good white wines now, which I think is great. And I think some of the critics are starting to recognize the value of white wines and give white wines a little bit more of their due. You know, we used to kind of comment that a lot of the critics, you know, they would rate white wines probably 4 or 5 points lower than a comparable quality red, in my opinion. But I think that's starting to change, and I think that's a good thing. Anything that gets people to appreciate good white wines and winemakers to try to focus on making more good white wines, I think is a good thing.
Do you think they're going to plant more white varietals in Paso, or what do you think about that? Is it shifting a little bit?
There are a number of factors there. You know, one is economics, and the fact of the matter is that growers get more money for red fruit right now than they do for white by a pretty large margin. I mean, for example, I used to get Roche Blanc from G2 Vineyard in Paso, and turned out that Roche Blanc ended up being diseased. And so Bill, the owner of G2, ripped it all out. And then he at some point realized he made a whole lot more money on red fruit than white fruit. So there's no white fruit in G2 Vineyard right now, which is kind of unfortunate. So that's one aspect. And I think as people are able to charge more money and people appreciate fine white wines, are willing to pay a little more money for them, that could help shift that a little bit. The other factor I think is much of Paso is a little bit warm for a lot of the white varieties. There are some of the Rhone whites that do well here, but it's too warm for a lot of them. And, given what most people think is an increasing global warming climate increase, and certainly this last vintage, it was kind of scary if that's the sign of times to come. I think we need to generally start looking at what varieties we're planting in the area and try to focus on ones that are going to be appropriate for a warmer climate if it goes that way. And certainly I'm starting to do that. I'm starting to look more at more Spanish varieties, more Southern Italian varieties. I've got a number of growers that are, asking me what I would like them to plant for me, and I'm saying things like Godeo and some of the Spanish varieties. So we'll see, but definitely there are a number of people that are still very interested in planting some good white varieties here in the Paso area.
Thanks, Dave. Hey, I want to give Mike Kelly a chance. He's got some questions that are interesting, and I know he's got to run. So go ahead. I promise you some time there, Mike.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you, Mike. So I'm not familiar with the winery, David, so I apologize. Never had one of your wines, so I'm a newbie in that regard. Not newbie to the wine industry by any stretch of imagination, but for that. So the first question, and these are just rapid fire questions, really. So the vineyard for your Albarino, where is it located, and is it coastal, and does it pick up any salinity like some of the other European Albarinos?
It's the Albarino that I get has always come from Plum Orchard Lane Vineyard, which is in the Templeton Gap district. For those of you who know Paso, it's about a half-mile west of Trader Joe's. So it's a little bit inland. It's not on the coastal side of things. And, it's interesting because a lot of people immediately think, well, Albarino is going to do best in a place that's closer to Rias Baixas in climate, which is the homeland for Albarino, more coastal, more marine influence. But I think the answer is we really don't know, because it's been grown there, but up until maybe 20 years ago, it wasn't really grown anywhere else. So I don't think we can really quite yet say what is the best area to grow. It'll be a bit different depending upon where it grows, obviously, but I don't think anyone would confuse the climate of the Templeton Gap area with the climate of Rias Baixas, but I've been really happy with the fruit that I've been getting and the quality of the Albarinos that I've been making. Now, some of the top Spanish producers are now doing a little bit more of some of the stuff that we've done. A little bit more barrel exposure, a little bit more lees exposure, a little bit more skin contact or skin fermentation stuff to add a little bit more complexity to the wines they're making over there in Spain. But anyhow.
Okay. And does it pick up any of the salinity from the fog coming in, you think?
I don't know that it does, I mean, I don't know that there's a lot of salt content coming down in whatever fog we get. But I mean, Albarino naturally has kind of a nice vibrancy and a little bit that can come off a little bit of salinity.
Okay. Second question, real quick. In your sense of out of place, is the Chardonnay in oak and then the Sauv Blanc in stainless steel or something else? Then you're combining the two, or are they all in oak?
The Sauvignon Blanc, I believe, is an oak. I'll have to check the notes, but the Chardonnay, I think that was in oak, but most of it was neutral oak. It was very neutral. I use most of my wines made in used barrels because I don't like to over oak white wines. But the nice thing about oak barrels is they give you more of a textural component, a little bit of that mouthfeel that you tend not to get with stainless steel. So that's why most of my wine is made in used barrels.
Well, that was the basis of the question, the textural sense of if they were two different stainless and oak, but if they were together, then that makes some sense.
Well, they're not put together until the very end. So I keep all the components separate and then just assemble them at the blends. The other thing I'll say about all of my wines is none of them go through malolactic fermentation. So it doesn't have that creamy, buttery characteristic you get in a lot of California Chardonnays.
more crisp.
Yeah.
Okay. And have you ever done a Marsanne Roussanne blend, like a 50-50 blend?
No, I haven't. I've done Roussanne Viognier, I've done Marsanne with a number of other things, but I've never done a 50-50 Marsanne Roussanne type
Okay.
blend.
And last quick question I had for you. Are you thinking about doing any other kind of Rhone varietals by themselves, like Bourbelinck or Claret Blanche or a white Chateauneuf du Pape?
Not really. I mean, I try not to just make wines that somebody else has already made, you know, so I don't see the point in, you know, for example, a lot of people say I'm going to make a Burgundian style Chardonnay. Well, you know, there are plenty of Burgundian Chardonnays coming out of Burgundy. You know, I'm probably moving a little bit away from the white Rhone varieties, partially due to the climate situation, partially just due to the fact that there are a lot of other white Rhone blends being made in Paso these days. So I'd rather do something a little bit different. So right now, the only white Rhones that I'm actually working with, I think, are Viognier and Grenache Gris at this point.
Okay. And I didn't write this question down, but having spent some time over in Portugal, and so when you're looking at the Spanish white varietals, there's some great white varietals in Portugal also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably should have mentioned that too. I mean, it's the same basic issue that some of those varieties are better suited toward warmer climates. They're a little bit more southernly located than some of the French varieties. And I think we need to collectively be looking at those as possibilities moving forward.
Great. Hey, I have to run, but I'm going to be headed that way in December for 3 or 4 days, and definitely will. You piqued my interest.
Okay, sounds good.
Great.
Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And I know we're a bit over time. Dave, thanks for your patience and going through those questions. Mike, I'm going to turn it back to you, and I'm going to turn it back to you with the reminder to remember the recording.
Right. Thanks. I got my sticky note right here, you know.
Yeah, any other questions? If anyone has it, I mean, I try to pride myself on being open to answering whatever questions. And, you know, here in our tasting room, we try to make it an educational experience. So any question you
Lara and Patrick had a question. They wanted to know how many cases you're producing every year.
It's somewhere between 700 and 800 cases right now. And that's typically spread across usually 6 to 8 different blends, each vintage. So each blend is usually something in the neighborhood of 75 to 125 cases.
Okay. Hey, I'll open it up for everybody to unmute, and then you can go ahead and ask Dave any questions you have.
Hey, Dave, Steve Perlman, how you doing?
Good.
First time hearing about your wine. I'm really interested about it. Just not being a member or having been able to taste it yet. But just go to your website. There's some wines available, or can I get?
Yeah, there's some wines available. Where do you live?
Laguna Niguel, OC.
Yeah, I can ship to anywhere in California. So, you know, yeah, you can go to the website, or, you know, if you want to just email me at dave@monochromewines.com if there's certain things, certain types of wines you like, or if you want me to just pick out some that you think might be a good selection for you, I'm happy to help.
Dimitra?
Great. All right.
Yeah, actually, I will abuse this. So I'll have 2 but very quick questions.
Okay.
One question is, I think people sometimes ask you whether you're gonna make a sparkling wine.
Mhm.
And the second question that I have is, I believe you're a big supporter of wine for pause. And I remember the first time I tasted in a tasting room, it was also like some money were going to help alien dog. So if you can kind of tell about your connection to to wine for pause and animals.
Okay. Well, let me hit the first one about the sparkling first. I get this question a lot. And, you know, I haven't really seriously considered making a true sparkling wine. There are a lot of people that are doing that right now. And I don't know what I would do that would be particularly unique or interesting in that area. But one thing that I am thinking about, if I can figure out a way technically to do it, is the notion of thinking about making kind of a super Vino Verde. You know, if any of you have had a Vino Verde, they're sort of Spanish-based or Portuguese-based wines, lighter. They've got a little bit of effervescence to them, not as much as a true champagne, but enough to kind of give you a little bit of interesting elements and sort of pop the aromatics a bit. So I'm kicking around the notion of doing something like that, trying to make a more serious kind of super Vino Verde with just a little bit of spritz to it. So the challenge is, how do you go about doing that and giving it a little spritz, you know, having to pressurize it, or I don't know what, but that's the big challenge. If I can figure out how to do that with the type of equipment that I have available to me, then I may do that.
Colina would be the other example from North Spain that is also similar to Vino Verde with some effervescence.
Yeah. So something like that I think would be interesting to do. And particularly here in warm climates, you know, something like that that's a nice, easy drinking, crisp and refreshing type of a wine would be great. As to your second question, animals, you know, my wife and I are both big animal lovers, and we, you know, usually have multiple. Right now we have 2 dogs and 5 cats and a chicken. We've lost a few recently, but we've always been big animal lovers. And, you know, in the wine industry, you get approached by a lot of different entities looking for support and donation and all that. And they're all worthy causes, but at some point you have to sort of say, okay, let's try to focus on 1 or 2 causes that we're really behind and make sure that we support those well. And for us, animal welfare is one of them. And so we've done a number of things. The Wine for Paws program that he mentions is to benefit the local animal shelter down in San Luis Obispo. And they do some great work. And so the Wine for Paws program is a weekend. There are, I think, 80 or 90 local wineries that get involved, along with a few restaurants and other businesses here in the Paso area. And typically a percentage of sales goes to the cause. And we always kind of do a little bit more than the minimum. We usually put together special 4-packs at a special price, and we usually give 20% of all the revenues to the cause. So typically, you know, we're donating a few $1,000s to the cause after each of those events. So it's a good program. You know, if you love animals, I would encourage you to keep your eyes open for it. It's usually right around March, April of each year. And, you know, it's a good opportunity to support some of your favorite wineries in the Paso area, and also support a good cause while you're at it.
I'll put in a shameless plug for Paso Robles Wine Fanatics group. We had a party in April, and I believe I wrote a check. 10% of the ticket sales went to Wine for Paws, and I think I wrote a check over $500, something like that.
Yep.
And we will do that again next year. So anyways, anybody else have a question? Susan? No?
It's awesome.
Okay,
Okay, can I share a story?
go ahead. Go ahead, Laura.
So I have visited Monochrome twice, both kind of during the pandemic. The first time we wandered over without an appointment, and you graciously took us in. But the second time was more memorable. And this is one of the most memorable. I think this one will stick with me, because it was Labor Day weekend of 2021. And I think it was, I don't know, 108 during COVID. And I completely appreciate and understand that you weren't doing tastings inside. And we had an appointment for 4 of us, and we were outside on the patio, and our glasses were so hot before you poured any wine in them. It was a very unique experience, to say the least. And I appreciate the care that you took during COVID for yourself, for your family and your staff, and for others. And Yeah, and also being open and trying to be welcoming to customers. And I know that that wasn't easy, but literally we were like, we couldn't really taste the wine that day. It was kind of hard. And I'm just going to be super honest with you. First time we went there, we were like, I don't know, these might be overpriced for white wines. I am now a member. We haven't been back since we've been members. We're newer members. I actually think it's a bargain what you're putting out. The quality of what you're doing is really good and extremely interesting. And that whole thing about pushing yourself to try something different, and rows and rows of Chardonnay, everywhere, and you are doing something different, and I truly appreciate that and love it. And so thank you very much for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you,
pouring
Laura.
117 was a challenge because the glasses, as you said, would be 117. And so I would try to over chill the wines to bring them out and compensate. But despite best efforts, I think there was about a 20-second window of opportunity where the wines were at about the right temperature, and beyond that, But I remember one day it was 117, and I think I had 4 or 5 people join the wine club. And I thought, well, if you like the wines under these circumstances, you'll really like them under better circumstances.
Yeah, very good. Anybody else?
I look forward to becoming a member. I am so impressed.
All right, thank you.
Yes,
The wine is very good, Dave. Very good.
it is very good.
And like Jason, we're both big red wine drinkers, so
Well, I get a lot of that. I get a lot of people coming into the tasting room, and maybe they're part of a couple or part of a group, and there are always a few that are like, well, I really only like red wines. And more often than not, they end up liking the wines because they have a little bit more character and complexity than what people tend to think about with white wines.
no, I always feel like when you go to a winery, when they introduce a white or a rosé, I'm waiting for what I believe is their wheelhouse, their flagship red, and that's what I'm looking for. And then they want to put these out in front of me first, and I'm like, no, just get me to. I just want the reserve, Syrah. And it's not that I dislike them. It's just my expectation is from the reputation of the winery is, something different. And I know it's a marketing thing and you want to attract everybody, have something for everybody. But I like what you're doing, because what you're doing is concentrating on the thing that you're most passionate about, as I think every winemaker should. But it's also a business, and they have to. There's people who come along in these tasting parties that don't have they have a palate for other than, so.
The other thing that you refer to is a lot of tasting rooms you go into, it's like, here are inexpensive, lesser wines, and then we're building up to our big, showcase wine. It's, a lot more expensive and a lot bigger deal. I try not to do that. I mean, I make a lot of different wines, but I wouldn't say, I typically, when I'm pouring at the Albarino is what I pour first. I would by no means say that's a lesser wine than any of the others. It's just a little bit lighter. It's a little bit different wine. And that's part of the reason why I price the wines almost all about the same, because I don't want to suggest that one is any lesser than the other. I just try to make a range because people have different palates. Some like lighter wines, some like more rich, full body wines, but one is not inherently any better or worse than the others.
I think I appreciated that when I went to your website to purchase wine. They're all the same price, and that was unique.
Yeah. And Mike, we'll get you there. We're trying to expand your horizons. No, and again, I talked about Chardonnay. I'm a Northern California girl. I've grown up here. Pinots and Chards were, my and Cabs were my first loves. I still love a good Chardonnay, but again, a good Chardonnay, and they're not all the same. And there are plenty of Chardonnays that we do that are not inexpensive at all, that are done very, very well. And when we were in France last fall, we were at a Michelin star restaurant, and the traditional wine pairing that we had with it, every single wine was a white. they did not pour a single red for the entire dinner course. Right? So I think that those are the things that, you know, we need to take that thought process off. And I think that the rosés have already happened that way a bit, right? Right? We think about rosés very differently than we did 15 years ago. And I think that there's a time and place for the whites as well.
I won't mention the winery, but they poured me a $60 rosé one time. I was like, what? Kidding me?
Well,
Well,
and-
why do you think that it should be priced less?
No, I didn't. I actually thought it was outstanding tasting,
Yeah.
but I was shocked by the price because my mind had a price range for white and red, and what the red's always way more expensive and the white is lesser. And maybe it comes from that era of the white, what was the blend, the
White Zinfandel?
White Zinfandel, yeah. That was cheaper, you know, cheaper than a loaf of bread. And and it was like,
I think also to Laura's point,
gave me a horrible headache though.
I think to Laura's point, in France, they take their white wines a lot more seriously, you know,
Right.
and they're equal billing to the reds. And if you look even at, like, for example, Chateaubriand, which is one of the big first growth Bordeaux, their red wine is, I don't know what, $750 a bottle. Their white wine is more than that. The white wine is more expensive than the red wine. So, you know, I think that definitely entered into the factor when I was pricing the wines, is I didn't want to underprice them because I feel like people read into that to try to determine, you know, whether it's a worthwhile wine or not.
Well, that's how I kind of was thinking when I first started going to Paso, which is about 20 something years ago. And yeah, so that was just a what I was going for was red. My wife, trying to walk both sides of the track, you know, so to speak, she likes Viogniers, which are way too sweet for me. But anyways, we buy a lot of both. I got to get her drinking more of the white because we're getting backlogged here. Anyways, does anybody else have a question?
Yeah, just a comment. I think David, what you mentioned about like pricing and things like that, being a white-only winery, it kind of puts you in this position that you actually can do this, because a lot of people like here also in Paso who do mostly reds, but I know that there are few people that want white. Okay, we'll do white, it will be half a price or 2/3 of a price of red. So the right way kind of bring, like, it's a little like marketing messaging that white is not as good as red. And for you, you don't have this message at all. It's because they only make wines, so they're all good.
Yep.
Yeah,
As
and
a
that was
marketer,
like
I can appreciate this.
that was like a major irritation when you belong to like what you would think of like a big red winery, and then they would send the wine club shipment. It was already winemaker's choice, right? And then they slam a couple whites or rosé in there. I don't want that though. That what got me on the trip of I'm only joining clubs where I can customize, and that's it. You know, and I only want what I want. I don't want what the winemaker wants me to drink. I'm going to drink what I want. And if I don't find that, I don't typically join. But your club is very friendly to that. So. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I got to ask my packaging question. So I love, you know, right? Your bottles don't have a foil on them. I didn't open this one tonight. Don't have a foil on them, so that's good, eco-friendly. But damn, it's heavy, expensive to ship. It's cutting into your profit. Are you going to lighter glass? Are you going to screw top? Are we going to boxes? What are you doing?
I've gone to lighter glass starting a couple of vintages ago. And you know, I think it's a bit of a struggle, honestly, between those considerations that you lay out. And the fact of the matter is that people draw impressions in the packaging of wine and packaging of products, you know, and they infer value to it. And the story I always tell people is you could get a bottle of Harlan Estate wine, which is, I don't know what, $1,600 a bottle now or something like that. And you could put it in a brown paper bag and you could pour it off a folding table in aisle 7 of Walmart into a red Solo cup. And you could pour it for people and they would say, yeah, that's a pretty good wine. I like it. I would probably give you $8 or $10 a bottle for it, you know? So it definitely comes into play. And when I was developing the packaging for Monochrome, I did a couple of things. One, I did use a serious bottle. I mean, this is basically a red wine bottle. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, just to send the message that it is a little bit more of a serious wine than your typical, you know, fruity rosé bottled in a clear bottle with flowers on it or something like that. But also the fact that it's a dark bottle, I think suggests the fact that this wine is made to be ageable to some degree, you know, because that's one of the key things you look for when you're trying to age wines is a darker bottle and keeping them in a place where they're not exposed to direct sunlight. So, yeah, it's a bit of a balance. I mean, having said that, I was looking at another concept where I was trying to make wine specifically for shipping and making that there were some actually plastic bottles that were glass lined. They had a very thin glass lining on them so that they were not permeable to air. And I was working with the company to try to design them so that the shape factor was as compact as possible. So the overall volume versus the volume of wine. The problem is I could never really get the shipping costs down enough to reflect how much weight I was actually taking out of the situation and how much physical space I was taking out of the situation. You know, if I could get the shipping rates that Amazon gets for their shipping, then I could do some marvelous things to be able to ship wines out to the world and ship good wines at a much lower overall price. But we're not there yet, unfortunately.
I think Lara's going to remember we got into this conversation with Riley when she was on 2 months ago. And I go, all of her bottles were slender, what I used to call Zin bottle. For wine refrigerator owners, they're heaven. Yours are not that, the girth on yours are not that unmanageable, but there's other ones.
Well, Turley is the biggest offender.
Huh?
Turley is the biggest offender in that regard. They have those very sort of large diameter bases of their bottles that tend not to fit into conventional wine racks.
And then the Union Sacre, your neighbor, like they got the bottle's even taller.
They're long.
Yeah, it's real long neck. So yeah, consistency, because all those wine fridges are rated for Zin bottles.
Right.
Completely, right?
Or Cabernet bottles.
But I really
Cabernet
appreciate
Cabernet.
David, I really appreciate your answer. I really appreciate the business side of your answer and that you've researched this and looked into it and done that. That you've been thoughtful about it. And I do understand the mindset of, you know, the heavier bottle because it's the experience. You were describing the experience. And that to me really is what wine is about. It's about sharing an experience, sharing a story. And that's when wine sings the most.
Yeah.
And so I do appreciate that. That being said, I continue to push, particularly those of you who are not a Turley, are not a Justin, you're not competing on a grocery store shelf or a Total Wines and More shelf for people who are uneducated, right? I would hope that most of your buyers are educated enough to understand that we are buying your craft and your love that you've put behind it, and that I would rather pay you for that than the glassmaker and the UPS or whatever shipper we're using.
That is an excellent point. In that kind of the approach of the group and this forum here, we're trying to support the smaller producers. We're not asking to get Justin Justin or Austin Hope or Dow, or love to talk to Daniel Dow, it'd be great, but what we're trying to do is serve the smaller boutique, smaller producer community. And I think that's what the value that our group brings to Paso Robles.
Yeah, I agree.
Anybody else have anything?
I'm gonna, oh, you can't see me. I'm gonna, hi, everyone. I'm gonna say I'm over 2, David. I keep trying because I'm on tour a lot and I try to go through, and when I'm recording out in Paso area, I'll drop in on some wineries if I get a chance. And sometimes I'll bring some pretty well-known people if they're available. I'm over 2 with Monochrome.
Well, we're now open Wednesdays through Sundays. So we used to, originally we were only open, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Then we added Thursday. Now we've added Wednesday. So, but I mean, if you really want to taste the wine, you're only going to be here on a Monday or Tuesday, then email me and we'll see if we can work something out.
All right, that sounds good. Both of them were on a Wednesday, like 3rd week of June, we were flying through, and I can't say who it was, but it was. And but the booking wasn't happening, and then went over there, but you guys were having, I guess, gonna have a meeting with Emerson Wine. We had that like small room, and they wouldn't let me stay, so oh well. But
Sorry.
I'm gonna keep trying, so I'll email you.
All right, that sounds good. Yeah, it's just
All right,
Dave.
thank you.
Okay, Troy is already
Oh,
intrigued.
goes to the Alta, so I don't really-
What do you do, Troy?
A lot of stuff. I work with different recording artists and bands. I produce music to that whole world.
Oh, nice.
And there's an artist that has built a place up in Paso, outside of Paso Robles, between Cambria and Paso. And but he is a member of the Counting Crows. Have you ever remember them?
I do know them, yes.
Yeah, so I go up there, we're working on his project, but then there's downtime, and so I can get away, and that's when and I understand sometimes it's just like last minute and it's probably not going to work out, but I keep having this weird luck with Monochrome. So now that I've seen David, we're vibing, right? We're vibing, so it's gonna happen. I can feel it, and I'll email you if it's like, hey man, this is gonna happen. Can it happen?
Hey, I'm gonna stop the recording for right now. Okay, that way I don't have to